Hello, everyone. For the purpose of this speech, I wanted to talk about dissociative identity disorder. Have you ever been driving a long distance and you realize that at some point in the journey you don't remember how you got from point A to point B? Maybe you missed a turn. What you've experienced is called highway hypnosis. And according to Deborah Haddock in her book, the Dissociative Identity Disorder Sourcebook, this is called a form of dissociation, and it's a mild form of dissociation. So what we know about dissociation is that it exists on a scale, and that on one end of the spectrum, the near end, where most people usually reside, you have things like highway hypnosis, whereas on the far end of the spectrum, you have what's called dissociative identity disorder, the extreme end. Dissociation or dissociative identity disorder was originally called multiple personality disorder by the American Psychiatric Association, but was reclassified in 2013 with the release of the DSM-5 to dissociative identity disorder, or DID. And basically what it means is when a person dissociates so much that they present with two or more separate ego states, alters, or personalities. Tonight I wanted to talk about what causes DID as well as some of the controversy surrounding it. The current understanding of DID by those who believe in its validity as a diagnosis is that DID is caused by serial childhood trauma, usually before the age of 9. This is called a traumagenic theory, meaning something is caused by trauma. Opponents of dissociative identity disorder and its validity say that DID is iatrogenic in nature, meaning that it is artificially created by either by the therapist who leads the patient on, or by the therapist, or by the client themselves. Nicholas Spanos states that he believed that it was very common for patients to fake the symptoms of DID in the hopes of obtaining reward or succor or special treatment from their therapist. I have a problem with this because DID, patients who have DID face a lot of stigma in the clinical setting, largely from people like Spanos. These people go years not getting the treatment that they need because they walk into a clinical setting and they're not treated the way that they need to be treated. And then to say nothing of the fact that in a social setting, these people can't be out about their diagnosis because of the stigma that's associated with it. I don't see many people faking having DID. And even if there are those who do, the symptoms of that are covered under the factitious disorder section of the DSM section on dissociative identity disorder. So it should be something that a learned clinician can easily recognize. So what we know about trauma is that trauma can change the physical structure of the brain. Think about Pavlov's dogs and what we know about learned behavior. As we learn through stimuli in our outside environment and putting together facts, new neural pathways are created in the brain that help us associate stimuli with knowledge. So with Pavlov's dogs, the metronome would click and his dogs would associate it over time with being fed. Trauma can cause a type of learned behavior when it comes to dissociation. Intense trauma causes the body to be flooded with stress hormones like epinephrine. And we know for a fact that the constant flood of these hormones can have effects on the physical structure of the brain, such as cortical thinning and changes to the hippocampus, amygdala, brainstem, and prefrontal cortex. And the truth is, physical changes to the brain cannot be explained by iatrogenesis. And this is something that is admitted by Dr. Natasha Tracy in her article, Dissociative Identity Disorder Controversy, Is DID Real? So, but what about, can DID be manufactured by the clinician for personal financial gain? This was something I had never heard of before, and I ran across it while researching for this speech. Dr. Newman states that one therapist can net $20,000 a year off of a single patient that they're treating for DID. And so a therapist might have a vested interest in manufacturing patients who have this diagnosis. I believe that this is absolutely a laughable thing to say. it is based on no reality whatsoever, and I believe it comes from a place of malice. So I really I can't give any thought to it at all. So some opponents of DID also go so far as to attack the known prevalence of childhood abuse in our society. So is childhood trauma as widespread as proponents of DID seem to think it is? Well, what does the DSM-5 say? The DSM states that of all the DID patients in the US, Canada, and Europe, 90% of those people state that they have a history in their childhood of extreme abuse. This raises the question, is DID a rare disorder? Well, no. The DSM states that roughly 1.5% of adults in the United States meet the criteria for dissociative identity disorder. That doesn't sound like a high percentage, but the truth is you're talking in a country that has hundreds of millions of people. You're talking about millions of people. Going back to Dr. Newman claims that of 15 female patients that she treated, all 15, and I have to quote this, showed a strong tendency to flaunt their diagnosis and symptoms and an eagerness to retell their stories with graphic detail, usually unprovoked, which I guess is not something you would expect someone who has DID to do. Which, again, what Dr. Newman is talking about is covered in the factitious section of the DSM-5. So I don't think that there's really her very limited in scale experience here is any reason to throw out DID from the DSM-5. And again, Dr. Newman should know that. She should know that these people aren't meeting the criteria that's laid out in the DSM-5. They're meeting the factitious disorder. And again, 15 patients out of millions of people in the United States is not exactly a strong sample size to make that kind of conclusion. Piper and Mirsky, in their paper, go on at length to attack the prevalence of childhood abuse, saying that we cannot rely solely on the testimony of our clients and instead must hope to have their testimony corroborated by evidence, either testimony from the abusers, evidence that the abusers have left behind, and as well as physical symptoms that would be picked up in the treatment of the child. And the truth is, this is also pretty laughable. Do we honestly expect abusers to leave a paper trail? Of course not. They're good at hiding. That's what they do. That's how they get away with it for years. And the truth is, as somebody who works in emergency medicine, I can tell you that the signs of trauma, the signs of abuse, you're not going to see them unless you're really looking for them, and that's unfortunate. So why is there so much heated controversy surrounding this diagnosis? There's controversy surrounding every disorder in the DSM, but nothing seems to garner it so much as DID. So why? Well, Dr. Ross, who is president of the ISSTD, went on a podcast interview with Emma Sunshaw called System Speak, and he had several sobering theories as to why this is the case. The first is that humans want to live in a safe world where everything fits into nice pieces. But the truth is, it's an ugly world, and there's abuse everywhere, and that DID forces us to face that reality, and a lot of people don't want to do that. Dr. Ross also says that clinicians aren't immune to abuse statistics, so it's entirely possible that opponents may be against acknowledging DID because of abuse in their own past. If we can push away someone else's abuse and experiences, we may be able to push away our own. In an even more sobering theory, Dr. Ross also states that if there are pedophiles in the Catholic Church, there must also be the possibility of abusers in the clinical setting as well. And those people would have a vested interest in dissuading the DID diagnosis. So I hope you enjoyed this speech, and I hope you go away from it with a greater understanding of DID and the debate around it, and you have a greater sense of compassion for the people who suffer from it. Thank you very much.